Okay.
Harris County and Fort Bend County, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Just they want one each.
Well, David may not want one. I was just going to use one to.
I'll take swag.
Hmm?
I'll take swag.
Okay.
We don't, well, we've got some swag, but not much.
This is swag.
Yeah, according to me, it is. We have to get authority every time we want to buy something like that.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah. Still
When
got to
we
talk
go to-
about those T-shirts.
When we go to Facebook and Twitter's offices and stuff like that, I swear every time I go to their offices, I walk out with more stuff. You know, it's like, oh, here, have this nice leather-bound book or this.
Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Hicks, and I'm chairman of the United. Brian.
And last numbers I've seen, it's nearly 60 million Americans are not properly registered to vote. That's 1 in 4. And even if we could wave a magic wand such that everyone who's unregistered now becomes registered, the fact is every 4 years another 23 million people move across state lines, another 18 million people turn 18, 19 million people turn 18, and another 3 million naturalized. So we always have to be re-registering folks and bringing people back into the system, having them update their process. And of course, as you know, election rules change from state to state. Some states have registration deadlines as long as 30 days in advance of the election. Others, you can register on the day of. And so a lot of voters are a bit confused. And by the time they start paying attention to the election, oftentimes it's too late to update their registration and they can't vote. And we believe that's a problem. So the group I'm the director of, Nonprofit Vote, joined with a number of other groups back in 2012, including election officials, to create this holiday called National Voter Registration Day. And the idea is to have this single unified day of action, of coordinated field events, of media events, that can help break through the noise and get people's attention before it's too late.
Okay.
And I'm glad to say that as we head into, well first off, I'm also glad to say that since 2012 we've registered over 1.6 million people. And as we head into 2012, we're really glad and excited that we've got the endorsements of basically every major election official association now. We have the National Association of Secretaries of State back in the holiday, the National Association of State Election Directors, the Election Center, or the National Association of Election Officers, and of course the EAC.
Right. They joined in 2012 or 2018? So we're
NAS
looking
is in
forward-
2012.
Okay.
NASED was earlier. Election Center just came on this year.
Right, so you're
and-
talking about all the groups that are joined for 2018.
Correct, correct.
great.
And as you can see here, you can see there's a lot of election officials who are stepping up and doing things in their respective states, and really how they're working to promote this holiday in their state. Other big accomplishments we've been able to do is we've been able to bring on over 50 major national organizations, groups we call premier partners. These are a lot of big digital media firms, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the Tumblrs, the Googles, Reddits, BETs. It's also a lot of major nonprofit associations, groups that do voter engagement work, from Rock the Vote and Voto Latino, to groups that are really just wanting to engage the communities, United Way, Military Officers Association. And then beyond that, we've got about 4,000 community groups across the country who have signed on as partners of the holiday. And that's basically in every state except for North Dakota, which of course doesn't have registration, and a few territories we've got partners. Really excited about the breadth and depth of the network. And many of those partners also have events which you can see registered on the website, where they're doing events at a library, at a student union, at whatever event in their community. And our goal this year is, through all this coordinated effort, to really put registration on the map and register upwards of, well, let's say significantly more than 300,000 voters, which
Right,
is
so it's
twice
not-
the number of people we registered in the last midterm.
So it's not one event, it's hundreds of events around the country.
Exactly, or thousands, really.
Great. David, can you tell us a little bit about what election officials and citizens should know about UCAVA Saturday?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned, UCAVA Saturday is that official launch point as we see it, but it's important to know it's about lowering risk. So as we approach Election Day, and my colleague mentioned about the 30-day mark is typically a marker for when the registration cutoff occurs. We see that as kind of lowering risk. So acting early, 45 days means blank ballots are going out, does not mean time is up. What we try to encourage is the use of our federal postcard application. We prescribe this form. It actually does two things. One, it registers you to vote and simultaneously request an absentee ballot. It's that secondary transaction that's most important for our voters, is to make sure they're getting queued up to receive an absentee ballot. We encourage them to submit beginning January of each calendar year. That way they're affording themselves the opportunity to receive their ballots timely and take advantage of that 45-day mailing requirement. There's also benefits of using this form, because then they can afford themselves the opportunity to receive their blank ballots electronically. So that by itself cuts the transit time in half, potentially. So we know, depending on the population, they may take advantage of that, or they may rely on mail. So that's probably the biggest message for our voters, especially, is to say time is not up. It's about lowering risk, but go to fvap.gov and you can complete a federal postcard application. There's also one other option that they receive, which is our backup ballot. We call this the federal write-in absentee ballot. So if they've submitted a federal postcard application, what happens is that they take advantage of the 45-day. As they approach the election, if their regular ballot does not arrive, they can use the backup ballot, and they can get that from our website as well, fvap.gov. And we provide a full listing of federal candidates based on their address. So they can complete it, print out the completed PDF package at the end of the process, sign all the necessary documents, send it in based on what the state allows. Some states, rely only on mail, others have other options available. And then if the regular ballot arrives, they can still cast that, send it in, and the election official will make sure only one is counted. So there's a number of options available for our military, their families, and overseas citizens through our website. And that's the big message we want to get out there. The other thing is we have our focus is on customer service. So we have a call center available through our regular business hours on the East Coast here in Washington. And so we're available to respond to any questions that come in during those hours, but also send us an email at vote@fvap.gov, and we'll make sure we're responding to any questions that come in from wherever the voter is in the world. For election officials, it's a little bit different. My hope is that they are all in good stead for UCAVA Saturday. I know we've reached out to South Carolina and North Carolina because of the conditions with Florence, and everything seems to be going smoothly, or at least they've made some accommodations to make sure they're hitting that mark. But that's something that we just encourage anyone to have images, photos of those ballots going out. We'd love to sing that, on social media and encourage to raise awareness about what's going on and the need to act early.
Do you have any thoughts on what non-governmental organizations can be doing to support this?
Well, we have an extensive network of voting assistance officers, but we know we can't do it alone. And so we rely heavily on various nonprofit groups to help us get the message out, especially for our overseas citizens. And that's probably the biggest challenge we face. And so we rely, we're trying to continue our partnership with companies who employ large numbers of Americans overseas. But then also those who, the expat community, they really coalesce, and it is a network of support. We know the military has their network of support, but for overseas citizens, that's a little bit more of a challenge. So unless you're in a country or city that has a large number of Americans, you may find it difficult. So we rely on that natural partnership and getting the word out through the nonprofits as well.
Okay, great. Brian, you talked a little bit about how there is, I believe you said 3 million new folks who are eligible to be registered each year. What sort of things, does your organization collect that data on how many folks are registered each year?
Well, the number that we look at for the folks who are registered generally comes from census numbers, and there's a few other folks who've done the estimates, but we know that there are large numbers of people who, I believe the number of people who move across state lines and therefore have to update their registration is like 23 million every 4 years. Okay. So it's like 5-6 million a year. 19 million people turn 18 and 3 million naturalize every 4 years. So divide all those by 4. Either way, you've got millions of people who need to update their registration or register for the first time every year. And I think, as David mentioned, much the same problem with the overseas military officials. The challenge is awareness. A lot of folks just don't know the process. They don't know how it works. They don't know what they need to do. A Democracy Fund did a really interesting study or analysis where they looked at voter confusion, and somewhere in the order of 40% of people weren't aware that they had to update their registration when they moved. Okay. And in states that had online voter registration, a lot of folks weren't aware that they had that available to them. And so I think, like David's program, we're working with community partners to really make folks aware and make them aware early when they can still do something about it. And that's really a big goal of the holiday.
So with the thousands of partners that you have in 2018, can you give us a little bit of an understanding of what they're going to be doing next week?
Sure. We have about 4,000 partners this year. Among those, and I'm glad to say it's in addition to being in just about every state and a few territories, they represent a broad cross-section of America. We've got a couple of thousand nonprofit organizations, including League of Women Voters affiliates and community groups and community health centers and folks like that. We've got about 560 libraries, huge chunk of libraries this year signed on. About 500 universities and colleges are going to be doing activities. We've got a number of businesses, co-ops, VFW affiliates, all signed on doing things in their respective community. And in every case, it looks a little different, but generally speaking, it's face-to-face interaction, which is some of the most high-value interaction we can do when getting a first-time voter engaged in the process. Is someone to look them in the eye, help them understand the process. Maybe they just turned 18 and they're new. They thought it was automatic. No, well, maybe in some states it is, but generally speaking, it's not. They have to proactively go out and fill out a registration form. And so, on campuses, you'll see tables at a student union. At libraries, you'll see a table out front. You'll see volunteers working in the lobby of a community health center or in front of a grocery store. Hopefully highly visual, getting the community's attention. In addition to that, we do have a lot of folks doing online and media stuff as well. So while that's the face of the work that's going to be happening in thousands of communities around the country, there's also a lot of folks pushing out online voter registration opportunities through social media. And thankfully, there's now 38 or so states that have online registration. So a lot of those social media posts can simply point to, you can register today right here, click here. And so through a combination of that online engagement and the field work, again, we're aiming to register over 300,000 voters.
Great. You mentioned social media. In 2016, we heard a lot about the Facebook effect. And so I'm assuming that Facebook on September 25th would do the same thing they did before, of basically talking about National Voter Registration Day and the vast surge of registrations coming in. Should election officials be expecting something similar this time around?
I think election officials should be expecting a surge in voter registration online. Will it be as big as 2016? I don't know. 2016 was obviously a presidential election year. It almost always drops off on midterms, but we are nonetheless hoping for a significant surge in voter registration. For what it's worth, we do know that a number of digital media partners are going to be doing stuff, from Facebook, Google, Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, and all these. And they're going to be pushing out, whether it's in product promotions or lead blogs or some kind of promotions on their websites about this being National Voter Registration Day, and you can register to vote here.
Right. David, like the EAC, FVAP works with election officials every single day. What would you say are some of the best practices that election officials and election offices are using to support overseas and military voters?
Yeah, we worked with the Council of State Governments to kind of research some of these best practices, and I think it comes back down to customer service. One of the big challenges we face is not only raising awareness for people to take action, but it's to dispel myths. And one of the big myths that we hear, especially amongst the military population, is that absentee ballots that come in from the military or overseas citizens are not counted or even considered unless the election is close, which we know is false. And so we continue to focus in on, every ballot that is timely received has to be fully accounted for, because if you have those negative perceptions in terms of the relative value of your ballot, you're not going to be likely to submit one. So that's one of the big challenges we face. And so through customer service and being proactive, for these election officials, if they're actively engaging and not just notifying them if there's a problem, but also giving them positive reinforcement, I think is probably the best thing we can hone in on in terms of best practices. I think we're also looking on the horizon to look at the usability of some of these systems for our military and overseas voters. And just making sure that if they afford themselves the chance to receive a blank ballot electronically, trying to make sure that the instructions are very plain language, simplified, that it's as usable as possible, because keep in mind that the operational conditions for our military or even for overseas citizens can be very different than what it is here in the States.
Right, great, thank you. I think we're going to take a few questions from Facebook, some online questions. I think we have one from Doug in Virginia. To what extent is the hashtag election ready push going to smooth out some of this surge in 2018?
I'll let you take that one, David.
Well, I think the election, anytime we can, especially for election officials and being election ready, I know that's been the constant mantra. So it's good to see in terms of our role at the Department of Defense is that we also administer waivers. So if a state or a locality can't meet the 45-day requirement for getting ballots out, that's when we find out there's a problem and we have to go through a review process. So election ready is really just a reminder to make sure that you've reviewed all of the address standardization requirements for overseas voters, for our military, if it's going to an APO, FPO. And I think it's a really good tool to make sure that they are going through all the various checklists that the EAC publishes. I know we've got resources on our website. So I think to a great extent it does help, especially the election community, to remind them. Because a lot of times we're dealing with election officials who are new, and they need as many reminders as possible.
Right, great. Brian, there's been difficulty for certain groups registering to vote, and I'm thinking more so those who have disabilities or those who are students, and particularly you talked about the 20 million folks who move every 4 years or so. But what does your organization do to help those who traditionally have not been able to register to vote as easily as others?
Sure. Well, I think that's where we go back to the face-to-face engagement. I think if you look at all the research around what works for registering voters, online voter registration is great for folks who are already bought in and they just need to update their registration. Oh, here's this convenient thing I'm going to do anyway. If you're really trying to bring in first-time voters, voters who maybe they're newly naturalized, they're still figuring out how this democracy thing works. Maybe they're just turned 18 and you know, it's still new to them. They studied civics in high school, but that was about the end of it. That for those folks, it really does take a little bit of face-to-face engagement, because it's not going to be, you know, an online post or a direct mail piece that's going to usually engage them.
Okay.
And so I think that's where all these field events we're doing around the country at college campuses, at community health centers, really is aimed at engaging that population.
That's great.
I would say, and if I could just jump in, I'd say we share that same exact embrace of what's most effective is doing that in-person engagement, and that's where we also do that. Training up our voting assistance officers, or you know, visiting embassies and consulates. But it's a difference from our program perspective to say it's not just about compliance, right? From our standpoint, it's also about program effectiveness, and I think that's probably going into the midterm, as you were talking about the need to update your address. That's always our big concern for active duty personnel who may have changed duty stations since 2016, for example. They really need to make sure their addresses are up to date with the election officials. So I'll be curious to see, you know, the numbers of ballots that are returned undeliverable, because that's always the big thing, is that the drop off in a midterm versus a presidential, it's never good to see, but I think it underscores the need to keep your address information up to date, but then also rely on that in-person engagement. We've seen a lot of our research that points to voting is a learned behavior, and it's habitual. So if you can, you know, get them engaged and start that process, they're more likely to continue.
Right. We only have a few minutes left, but FF recently released a report on overseas voters. What were the main findings of that, and what's your message to election officials as a result of this this study?
Yeah, so we do a lot of research. One is on, we're required to report to Congress on participation rates for our military and overseas citizens. And the most recent one was an examination of overseas citizen participation in the 2016 election. So I mentioned about 5.5 million as a total population, roughly about 3.2 million are voting age eligible. Of that, the participation rate was 6.9%, which I think is fairly low. And I think we have to do more research to understand why that is. I mean, I think there are a number of, we try not to, we're not prognosticators in terms of why people participate. It's all about awareness. We're not a get out the vote effort. But it's still something we want to know more about. And I think the biggest takeaway besides the participation rate was what we identified as what we call the obstacle gap. So in our survey, we asked various questions, and we can do nothing about their motivation, right? The motivation comes in for the nonprofits, the party mechanism, that natural organic process of whether someone's going to participate. Well, what's most concerning is the obstacle gap, and what we found was it was 30.5% as what we measured as the obstacle gap. And that means that all things being equal, if they were stateside or if they did not have a negative perception of obstacles, they would have participated. These obstacles can take the form of, I'm in a third world country, for example, working for the Peace Corps. I may lack confidence in the mail system, rightly or wrongly, but it's a perception that is driven by that type of infrastructure. And that's where I think we at the Department of Defense and the Federal Voting Assistance Program will be looking to refine our resources for after this election and start already prepping for the 2020 cycle as well. So that was probably the most significant finding.
Okay. Great. Brian, what can election officials do to partner on National Voter Registration Day? Because I know that you don't have all the partners in the world, but if there are some organizations that are out there now, what can they do to partner with you for National Voter Registration Day?
I think there's 4 clear actions that election officials can take. The first of which is to sign up and be a partner themselves. You know, and they can put up, you know, we've got posters and stickers that they can download and put up on their website or put up around their office to help encourage voting and tie into the holiday. But I think beyond that, they can help partner with third-party groups in their community. You know, again, we're working with a lot of community groups, you know, students who are going out and doing voter registration. Maybe they've never done voter registration drives before. We're certainly offering them training from our end. Here's how to comply with your state rules around doing third-party voter registration efforts, but we also always encourage them to contact their local election officials to get the lowdown there. And so I think to the extent that election officials can be supportive and helpful to these groups doing this effort, because they really want to be allies in supporting more people getting registered. And the third thing I think that election officials can do is really promote National Voter Registration Day on your own social media channels, but also use this as an opportunity to educate the public through the media. So if there's some unique voter registration rules or processes or deadlines you want to make people aware of, take advantage of National Voter Registration Day as a great news hook to get a press release out to say, hey, we XYZ County Elections Office are supporting this National Voter Registration Day. Get registered between now and the actual state deadline of October, fill in the blank. You know, and they can use it as an opportunity to really raise awareness around the process.
Can you show that poster again? I
Sure.
don't think I saw the entire thing there.
It's a double-sided poster, so we've mailed out about 40 or 50,000 of these posters around the country. They're being put up at college campuses, health centers, and other venues around the country. And then on National Voter Registration Day, they flip it around, and they've got the Register to Vote Here mantra. And of course, there's a little box where they fill in their own information about, hey, this is going to be at the student union at this date, or, you know, such and such grocery store, that they can fill in that information. And of course, everyone gets stickers. Now, we passed the deadline where people get this stuff mailed out, but you can still download the PDFs if you sign up as a partner and print them locally. And this actually was printed locally because I forgot to bring one when I came. So
Oh,
they
that's
print
great.
they print
That's
just fine
great.
locally.
I would say that, you know, we are getting close to the end of our time. So there's only one more question. You know, what's the parting message that you want to give to our viewers today?
I think David and I are both having the same framework that's going on here, and I think we all do. And Americans need to really recognize that our democracy works better when more people vote. From military personnel overseas to people just turning 18 to newly naturalized citizens, we need to find a way to bring every new voter into the process and move toward that goal of full, or at least nearly full, participation in our elections. And we can do it, but we just need everyone's help.
And actually, I think for me, it goes back to the question from one of the viewers about election ready. And I think that probably is not just for election officials now that I think about it, but it's also for voters in terms of, it's all about preparedness. We always talk about that in terms of emergency management, et cetera, et cetera. But it's as you go towards the election, everyone can help in terms of branding it, in terms of being ready for the election. Don't wait until the last moment. Take action early. And think of it, in my terms, I think of it as almost like a snowball in terms of as we approach the election, we're gaining momentum. And I think this is a great event to highlight the National Voter Registration Day, Uwakava Saturday, and then I would be remiss not to plug Absentee Voting Week, which is what we're highlighting the first week in October, which would be, you know, kind of that safe harbor, if you will, for, you know, get your registrations in. But then also a focus on, for our voters, our military and overseas, to say absentee voting week, you need to be focusing in on lowering your risk, getting those materials in, getting everything ready to go for election day, and I guess, you know, being election ready.
Great, great. Well, with that, I want to thank you both for being here today. I think this was very informative, and thank you for taking the time for this very important discussion. Before we sign off, I want to encourage everyone and all our viewers once again to look at our website at eac.gov or ffap.gov, and the other websites as nationalvoterregistrationtoday.org. And then also, we want to keep this conversation going. And next month, on October 3rd, the EAC will be on Capitol Hill for a public event to discuss election security, readiness, and other key election administration issues. You can get more information and register at eac.gov. And with that, thank you and goodbye.